All right. Well, thank you all for coming and joining me for this conversation. My name is TJ Kastning. I have been in construction recruiting for 13 years, been in recruiting for 15 years. I've seen inside hundreds of companies, and I have participated in somewhere well over 1,000 negotiations of various types. And I'm excited to reflect back to you, the construction leaders here in this conversation and listening to this recording, about what we've learned and share this perspective towards the goal of producing more abundant outcomes for our clients and our candidates. I know that each one of you has worked on this problem from your vantage point for quite some time, and I want to encourage you to share what you've learned along the way as well. A question that we hear a lot is, what do we need to pay? And this really has three parts, right? What do we need to pay to attract A players? What do we need to pay to hire A players? And what do we need to pay to retain A players? And a lot of times, very understandably, the thought process is we need to know kind of what is the marketplace. And this is very understandable. If you look at it from an aggregate level, there are certainly patterns and trends in compensation that we can learn from. But one thing that I've noticed as a recruiter who is privy to a lot of times in the conversation about compensation in a negotiation, privy to things that a client wouldn't necessarily say to a candidate or a candidate wouldn't necessarily say to a client, is there's a lot of concern about being taken advantage of. There's a lot of defensiveness. And what we want to do is talk about a framework that you can implement in your business for developing confidence and clarity around compensation that will help you attract the right people, help you hire them, and help you retain them. Employers are trying to make an offer to an employee that they actually haven't seen performance on. And this is a tricky problem. Similarly, the employee is trying to negotiate for themselves without understanding what are the finances of this business. They don't know what the margins are. And there's a lot that they don't know about the business, and they don't necessarily know how to go about negotiating. There's not a framework of negotiation that they should go with. And so you get people negotiating adversarially, a bit defensively, and it's not that they're malicious. One thing we see as a third party in this is that the parties are trying to do well by their families, they're trying to do well by their companies, and they just don't have the full picture. And we're going to talk a bit about how to make this a more collaborative conversation. So we're going to talk a little bit about static versus dynamic assets when it comes to understanding what's going on in compensation. And I'm going to beat on salary surveys just a bit here. A question I get quite often is, hey, what's the going rate for a superintendent? Or what should we pay a superintendent with 10 years of experience, et cetera? And I propose it's the wrong question. It's a little bit like asking what's the going rate for a 2x4. And for a 2x4, that makes a lot of sense because every 2x4 ideally should be the same, right? Not twisted, the same dimensions, the same wood, the same strength. But people are very much not like this. And if you look at, let's take superintendents, for example, in your company, the more you zoom in on each person, the more different they are from a personality standpoint, a contribution standpoint, a motivation standpoint. And so the idea that you should pay people the same as a going rate, a market rate, so to speak, becomes more and more absurd the closer you get to the person and the deeper you get into a negotiation. And so then hiring authorities and candidates are asking, well, what do we base value on? One more thought about salary surveys and aggregated data is it's incredibly untrustworthy. The data is not verified. It's not validated. If you go on Glassdoor, if you go to these different salary asset resources, Indeed does a little bit of this. They are not thinking about salary in high definition. They're not thinking about benefits packages. They're not thinking about niches within construction. They're not thinking about nuances within geographies, the peninsula versus San Francisco versus Sacramento, for example. They're thinking about it extremely lightly. And then if you look at the data sets, there's very, very little data. They're actually computing what they're saying the averages are based on often 2 or 3 data points, which is not statistically valid. In addition to this, the way we've been trained to think about compensation in a lot of ways is akin to how the market works with stocks. And if you buy a share of Apple stock, every share of Apple stock is the same as another share of Apple stock. And so there's a certain price, it's traded at a high frequency. The price finding action is very quick. And so you can always know what the value of an Apple stock is. But this is not the same way with people because they're not traded frequently. The cyclic rate of people getting jobs is very infrequently, often once per every several years. And so the market doesn't operate as an efficient price finding mechanism. What I'm saying by that is the data out there is not trustworthy. And when we've seen companies and people try to rely on this data for their negotiation, it's not a helpful tool, often ends up offending the other party. I've also, another side note, I've never seen a candidate or a client negotiate against their interests if, let's say, these averages work in a way that are not in their favor. All of a sudden they get dismissed. So what I'm making an argument for is forgetting about salary surveys, except from the perspective of just understanding generally what's happening in the market. And even then, CPI or the consumer price index is a little bit of a better indicator of generally what we should be doing with our compensation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about commodities, right? If you buy a gallon of milk at the store, every gallon of milk should be, like a 2x4, the same. It is a commodity, barrel of oil. People, however, are on the other end of this spectrum. So when we think about market rates for a particular title, this is thinking about that title from a commodity standpoint. And like I had mentioned earlier, the closer you zoom in on the person, the more unique they are, which really means they're not a commodity. And so what we want to do is back away from this mindset of seeing these titles, seeing these roles as commodity positions, because they're really not. Every superintendent is different. Every project manager is different. And so we need to go into the negotiation prepared for that. And I've got a model for helping us through that. Okay. Compensation negotiations often feel broken because employers don't know what the performance potential of the hire truly is before hiring. Employees don't know the company's financial realities. And this creates mistrust. It creates the need for leverage plays. It creates defensive decision making and the potential that no one feels really understood or fairly treated as a worst case scenario. And this is a problem because if we're hiring, we're trying to hire for durability, for fit, for relationship value. And yet sometimes we find ourselves haggling over compensation like we're at a garage sale. That's fine if you're at a garage sale and you're going to leave the garage sale and probably never talk to that person again. A little bit different, though, if that person is somebody that you're going to rely on to manage millions of dollars of risk, influence the culture of your business, and make you more or less successful, if that makes sense. So I hope I'm laying out some reasons why compensation right now, the conversations are a bit broken. Introduce is this concept that your mission is the most important thing that you have for determining how your compensation work and creating a clear, explainable model for your compensation based on your mission, based on your P&L, your values, your goals, and using that to drive a virtuous cycle of performance and compensation where people can essentially earn what they want to earn if they are willing to operate within your mission, vision, values, and compensation model to be more successful. And the reason why this is valuable is each one of you has probably experienced getting an email or getting a call or a conversation with a person saying, hey, I just got an offer from so-and-so company and they're offering me X more dollars than I'm making here. And this puts you in a bit of a pinch, I would imagine. This is an awkward spot. You're running projects, you've got a lot of inertia going on. And if you lose this person, you're going to be scrambling. You're going to be in your own desperate hiring situation. And this is not ideal for your clients. This is not ideal for your project. So what do we do? If we have managed compensation as a commodity, then what people need to do is get leverage in order to get a better price. And this is happening in a lot of firms. The mission isn't clear, the values aren't clear, the performance metrics that make somebody earn more or less are not particularly clear. And so what employees feel like they have to do is go secure leverage in order to have a conversation about a raise. There's not a roadmap for them of, hey, this is how you grow your career, this is how you grow your compensation. And because of that, they start having to look elsewhere. And we know this well. I run a recruiting firm and I see people looking for this leverage, sometimes to stay within their own company that they want to stay at, but they need leverage for that conversation because the leadership is not showing them a clear map to the increased quality of life that they want to have. So we don't want compensation to be a commodity. We don't want to pay people market averages. One more thing I'll note is if we generalize here, one thing I've noticed is people who are really concerned with market averages tend to be the underperformers in the market. The people who care less about market averages are the overperformers from a candidate basis. And companies will sometimes play a similar game with these averages. And it's not that anybody's necessarily malicious. Everybody's trying to figure out, what am I worth? And so what I'm going to propose here is a model of using your mission and your vision and your values and your P&L to show a person what they are worth and give them a roadmap for improving the business. We're not going to do this in a high amount of resolution because everybody here has different companies, missions, products, values. We have different contract structures, different billing rates, right? So this is not going to be a one size fits all type system. You're going to have to build this system with an awareness of how does our mission, our values, and our financial performance, our contract type, how we manage risk, go about influencing how a person gets paid, and how can we help them optimize their compensation. So mission alignment comes first. And this is my pure subjective opinion, having seen inside a lot of firms, but I don't see a lot of conversation about mission. What is our mission? And this is interesting because a lot of the companies that we work with build roughly similar types of projects. A lot of high-end residential, a lot of incredible, beautiful structures, a lot of large commercial work. And the mission that they have is actually not to build those things. They're driven by something deeper, and sometimes this is something they're not necessarily aware of, or they are aware of it, but it's only known within the leadership of the company. And somewhat rarely do we see this mission clearly, thoroughly communicated throughout the company and people held accountable for adherence or alignment to the mission. So, for example, Ambassador Group's mission is to honor the God-endowed nobility of human beings by promoting durable work durable relationships with meaningful work. And the reason why this is important is because we want our clients and our candidates to enjoy happier and more abundant lives. That's our mission. Everything that we do is subordinated to that mission. And through that mission, we can then recognize people who are contributing to that mission in various ways to varying degrees and create internal equity or equality or internal integrity in how we compensate the various parties. I like to say I want to pay people as much as possible, as much as is wisely possible. So we're not emptying the bank account every month, but we are looking for the people who see the mission from their vantage point and are doing everything that they can do to further the mission. And so for leadership roles in a construction company, this is going to look different, right? Estimators, project managers, superintendents, senior leadership, right? Everybody's got a different vantage point on how they impact what this mission is. And so one of the things I hope as a takeaway for all the leaders here is deep thoughts about what is our mission. And this isn't we want to be the biggest, we want to be the best. Why do you want to be the biggest? Why do you want to be the best? What do you actually believe about the world? And what do you believe so strongly that you're willing to be punished for in some sense? That is actually what your mission is. And when that is clear to the team, you can start building compensation structures, internal incentives, culture, job description, accountability around that mission, and develop your compensation model from there. Where we get to next is now we get to work with candidates from this position of clarity about here's our mission, here's our values, here's how this works out in our expectations, here's the job description with the outcomes that people are responsible for producing. And now when we're interviewing people, we can have a conversation with them in high resolution about what does clarity and success look like in this role? What are you held accountable for? How do you win? How do you fail? How do you make more? And so if you've got a candidate who comes in, let's say with a very lofty compensation goal, you now have a rubric to show them of like, okay, well, here's how you need to perform in order to meet these compensation goals. I'd love to see you hit them. And we can have a collaborative conversation about helping them achieve their goal. And maybe they're going to realize that, they're really performance wise, skill wise, probably worth 140. And we can now have a collaborative conversation about their merit, their value in this system. Or let's say we hire somebody and we pay them too much or too little. Now we have a rubric that's mission aligned for correcting that. And we can be having high resolution conversations about how their performance, their behavior, their outcomes, their attitude are impacting our mission and impacting their compensation. So what we're trying to produce here is alignment. We're trying to produce employees who see the big picture, company and a compensation structure that rewards that. So let's talk about where a lot of compensation starts changing for people is when there's a threat, right? When the company is threatened by a potential competitor attracting their people, this often drives a lot of compensation conversations. And the problem is this is reactive. This is not a good spot to be in. This is at this time, the person has already decided, I'm going to go interview elsewhere. I don't have a vehicle to have this conversation inside the company, and I need to go get leverage. This doesn't make senior leadership feel good. This doesn't indicate loyalty, and it puts the candidate in a position where they need to tread some pretty dangerous ground because this conversation could get them fired. And so we want to reframe this conversation in high resolution, having it more frequently about what is your contribution and developing a heuristic within the business that can measure this heuristic in simple ways to maintain a healthy conversation about compensation with everyone in the business. So a little bit of a simple visual here, but we're trying to overlap the Venn diagram as much as possible. If you think about the interests of the employee, the interest of the employer, the more this diagram overlaps in compensation and performance, the easier it's going to be to have these conversations and retain people. And I think this is potentially a significant competitive advantage for construction companies because the level of resolution that companies are having about compensation with tenured employees is very, very low. I've seen inside hundreds of companies. I've been a part of 1,000+ negotiations. Most people are not given a rubric for understanding what they're really worth. They need leadership from their leadership to really understand that. Otherwise, they're going to go look for leadership elsewhere. And that person may be in a situation where paying them $20,000 to $50,000 more makes a lot of sense. They've got a big project on their plate, and they'll budget it into it and they'll make that move. So in this ladder, another very simple visual, mission comes first. We can create metrics around that mission. One quick note about metrics. Metrics should be simple, and metrics should be very, very tied and aligned to mission. The most dangerous thing with metrics is called Goodhart's Law. When metrics become the goal, they actually cease to become a useful metric. A very simple analogy for this is, let's say in my own company, if I tell people that you need to make a certain number of calls per day, and they pick up a phone book and they call so many random people, that's a good example of how my metric has actually eroded the purpose of the metric, right? The purpose of the metric is to institute a certain work ethic towards a certain outcome. But that's been circumvented by a rote, simple adherence to the metric. And so when you create metrics, remember to align it very carefully to the mission and remember to not over-index on the metric itself. The metric itself is not the goal. So then we can go to the market. We can take a look at what is going on market-wide. We can look at trends. We can look at CPI. We can look at compensation data. At this level of analysis, this is still helpful. And then we can shape our messaging and our employment brand in our recruiting to the market. So when people are applying, if they can know that we have a structure where we're going to help you understand where your value is to the organization, how to optimize that value. That's going to encourage a much more collaborative frame when we're having this conversation about compensation, and set you up to have a higher resolution relationship, building more rapport, respect, loyalty with the candidate through that process. Let's talk about leading compensation. So a lot of people are thinking about compensation salary surveys with a little bit of a concern of overpaying and a little bit of a concern for underpaying. And I want to introduce the concept of marginal utility, which is a term nerdy economists use. To put it simply, a bottle of water in the Sahara is worth a lot more than the bottle of water in your refrigerator. And this is important because a person of a particular talent is worth more to some people than they are to others. I don't have a need to hire a superintendent personally, but you may. And so that person might be worth considerably more. Or let's say if you have a particularly large project with particular profit opportunity, or maybe you need to guard against a particular risk or downside, you may have a particular incentive to pay more. And so this is yet another reason why salary surveys can be a really bad guide, is the various factors that are going into what somebody's paid, why they're being paid that, is fundamentally critical to understanding what should someone be paid. I have seen people come into a situation where the contractor is desperate. They get paid probably more than they should, definitely more than the market is used to paying. And now they're attached to this compensation rate and then going back out to the market when that project finished and realizing this is a little bit of a one-time situation. But you don't want that person then dictating the averages for the whole industry and having everybody index that, oh, this is what we should be paying. One more compounding issue has been pay transparency laws, and I have a deep appreciation for the intent of pay transparency, that equity and integrity in our compensation would be equitable to the contribution of each person. However, as a recruiter, actually measuring contribution and measuring what motivates people is extremely complicated. We have interacted with thousands of candidates, and the ways people think about money vary very broadly. And so my caution with salary surveys, if this isn't coming through clearly enough, is they try to reduce everything down to a number, and it is not helpful. What I want us to get to is, in the industry, each company has a clear mission. Each company has a clear set of values, outcomes per role, compensation structure based around that role that is compatible with the contract types, the bill rates, the types of relationships they want with clients, and the end product they want the client to experience. And because of that, candidates can then realize where the fit actually is for who they are, how they contribute, what their goals are, etc. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what it means for this compensation to be commoditized. We already kind of covered this, talking about the 2x4s and the milk, but if we're thinking about people as commodities, if we're thinking about what is the going rate, this means we're thinking from a commodity perspective. If we think from a commodity perspective and we operate and lead from a commodity perspective, we're incentivizing and encouraging employees to also think from a commodity perspective, which means for as replaceable as they are, your organization is equally as replaceable. And so this is a problem if you're on a 4-year build and people are not necessarily replaceable. You're working with particularly talented people. You've got a lot riding on them. So the more you can decommoditize your company, your compensation, the experience of working with you, the more you're going to guard yourself from competitive pressures. One more factor in all of this is you have the data inside your company, right? Your P&L from a project basis or a macro company basis is what you should be basing compensation on, right? The pie in your company is this big, and your P&L will say how big that is. And it's up for you to use your mission, vision, values to determine what behaviors, what outcomes am I incentivizing to make this pie bigger. And so the first place we should go to decide what we should pay is to our P&Ls. What are our actual internal numbers telling us? And we're sovereign over these numbers. We should have absolute clarity. There's nothing hiding from us. And these are ways that we can build well-justified compensation structures that are explainable to people, and they don't have to guess about it. So the goal for employees is that compensation is fair to them, fair to their contribution. We want to pay as much as we wisely can. This kind of flies in the face of some capitalistic notions of get everything as cheap as you can. And the reason why I'm very comfortable encouraging this mindset of pay as much as you wisely can is because many of you are operating in a space of rarefied air, rarefied performance, and you can't afford to have people feel like commodities. They're not commodities. Once you find them, keeping them should be a major, major priority. And all of you know the pain of losing a critical team member at an inopportune time. So try to pay them as much as you wisely can, sustainably can, justifiably can. Explaining to them the compensation levers for, let's say they come to you and they want more money. Great. That conversation with a model now becomes an encouraging conversation, exciting conversation. This person wants to grow. You want them to grow. Here's how you do that. And in your model, you should know that your organization financially is well taken care of if they do these performance metrics, if they support your mission in these particular ways. And it's up for you to determine from your mission, from your values, from your contract type, from your bill rates, what those metrics are. And functionally, what you get from this is alignment. You get people who know that they are invested in the mission of the company, that they care about it, and that the company cares about them and shows them how they win when the company wins. Advantages for you is sustainability, team cohesion, and predictability. What I observe a lot is the lack of clarity creates a level of turbulence and churn in the construction industry where, because leaders are often not owning this space of conversation with employees, they feel like they've got to go get leverage. They're doing it at times that, and maybe they're not doing this maliciously, but they're doing it in the middle of projects. They're frustrated, and it's creating a lack of cohesion, a lack of predictability, and ultimately that can compromise the sustainability of a firm. For a lot of you, there's certain key team members that if you lost, replacing them is a 6-month endeavor. Maybe on active projects that hits team culture, morale, market reputation, client experience. These are critical roles to retain. This is about seeing employee interests aligned with company interests, and this costs leaders. This will cost time, this will cost energy, this will cost developing systems and competence and communicating these things constantly. And this is not easy work. This is work that you do for the rest of your company. The product of this will be, we get out of this reactive raise situation, we get out of reactive recruiting, which, by the way, that's my goal in this. The more strategic recruiting Ambassador can do, as opposed to reactive recruiting, the better positioned our clients are to take advantage and fully benefit from the work that we do. Urgency in hiring is gravel in the cake mix. So you're trying to make this cake. You're really trying to recruit people. You hired Ambassador Group. You're trying to get to the right people, to interview them well. But that urgency oftentimes is wrecking the ability for companies to take the time to build the relationship and do what they need to do in order to mitigate their risk in the hire. This kind of a compensation model I'm proposing is not something that you can build on a spreadsheet. This is something fundamentally you have to build in the culture of your business. This comes from every person in your business understanding clearly what your mission is and being able to say it and mean it and love it and feel like they are a moral good for the world, that they're making their communities better, they're making the world a better place, they're building beautiful architecture that is edifying people. This is serious infrastructure for building meaningful work. And this is where we can build the durable relationships. There's a famous quote out there that if someone's why is strong enough, they can endure any how. And I think about this a lot in hiring because you'll never hire for smooth seas. You always hire for rough seas. There will be problems in the future. The whole construction industry is a stress absorption machine. It's a complexity absorption machine. All the people that work inside the construction companies are managing that stress and that complexity through competence or maybe their cortisol. And so giving them a powerful reason to do the work that your company is doing is a big deal, and they should see that in the leadership of your firm. One of the things I like about this is having a leveling conversation after the hire, which, let's say they're underperforming or overperforming. You now have a rubric to compare against. and it takes the total subjectivity out of it. Because a lot of negotiations happen, the heuristic is confidence. How confident do I feel about this person? And as we all know, that confidence is tricky. You're trying to give someone millions of dollars of responsibility and cultural impact on your company in a matter of hours, right? In some ways, that's insane. None of us build friendships and rely on people in other contexts like that. This is a phenomenon, particular to business. And so having an index, having a compensation index can give people a rubric. Okay, you want lofty goals. Okay, here's how you need to perform. Oh, you're not performing to this level. We need to adjust your compensation, right? Now you have something to refer to. One other factor is, particularly since COVID, we've seen compensation go up dramatically, mostly due to inflation. And then some people, for example, leaving California, and there just being less talent, construction professional talent in California. But if you are tracking the billings of the company and you're tying in some sense the financial success of the project to the compensation, there's an automatic compensation for inflation. As the company's projects are growing due to inflation, so are people's earnings. This is one way or another, you need to keep up with inflation, because we're seeing some clients who, let's say, haven't hired since before COVID, and they're realizing we're hiring at a strata of compensation that is, completely out of line with the rest of the organization. Super tough issue. Now you've got to go about, relitigating basically all of the compensation in order to continue hiring or growing. Transparency is a tricky topic. There's levels of productivity to transparency, but one of the things I note is if the compensation heuristic is over, if it's clear to the whole business, you can publicly tie how people are performing to their compensation, and it can be clear who's the top performer in the organization, who's most aligned with company mission, vision, values, most contributing, and people can know that person getting paid more, and it's clear why. This is a helpful antidote to the problem of, people talk about their compensation, and if there's not this structure, this infrastructure around why do people get paid what they get paid, they come to you and say, hey, why is so-and-so getting paid more, right? And that can be a tough conversation to have reactively. James asks, is 3% a good average for compensation increases for COLA, cost of living adjustment? I don't know. I think it really depends. We've used a number of different calculators for calculating relocation between areas. And one of the things when you use these calculators is you'll note that the various geographies have dramatically different pricing structures for taxes, for real estate. And so I would look at the specifics of your area, James, and I can send you some links to those cost of living calculators. But if you look at, say, San Francisco versus Oakland versus Sacramento, you'll see some really different numbers. But also, I suppose it depends on what your goal is, right? Merely having a cost of living adjustment is excellent. That's going to go a long ways towards helping your people understand that this is something that leadership is proactive about. Thank you all. By the way, if anybody has any feedback, I welcome it. Oh yeah, absolutely. I welcome feedback. We're going to do more of these on a lot of different topics around retention, interviewing, my goal being to arm clients and potential clients with as much knowledge as possible to help your business be more successful, doing the most important thing, which is hiring, developing, and retaining the best people. So I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you very much. Until next time, see you later.